September 28th, 1854. 46 children board a steamboat in New York City, ages 6 through 15. They have no idea where they're going. Most have been told they're taking a train ride. 3 days later, they arrive in Dowagiac, Michigan, a town that's only existed for 6 years. The children are lined up on the platform, tallest to shortest, and the townspeople select them like livestock. This was the first orphan train. Between 1854 and 1929, an estimated 250,000 children would follow the same route, sent west from eastern cities, distributed across 45 states, Canada, Mexico. The official history calls this the beginning of America's foster care system, a charitable program to save homeless street children from poverty and crime. But here's what they don't emphasize. Less than half of these children were actually orphans. 25% had both parents still living when they were taken. Records were deliberately kept poor. Origins impossible to trace. Names frequently changed. And the timing. The first train left New York in 1854, the exact same period when Tartaria was being erased from maps and new power structures were consolidating across America. What if these weren't orphans at all? What if they were the children of a civilization we've been told never existed? The official explanation is straightforward. Humanitarian even. In the 1850s, New York City was overcrowded. Waves of European immigrants poured into the city. Poverty was rampant. Disease spread through tenement buildings like wildfire, and the children. An estimated 30,000 homeless children lived on the streets of New York City in 1854 alone. They were called street Arabs for their wandering habits. They sold newspapers, shined shoes, begged for food, formed gangs for protection, and were arrested and jailed alongside adults for petty theft. Enter Charles Loring Brace, a 26-year-old minister who founded the Children's Aid Society in 1853. Brace had a solution. The West was expanding. Farmers needed labor. Cities were full of unwanted children. And why not send the children west? Place them with farming families who would give them fresh air, hard work, Christian values, and a new life. He called it the emigration plan. We call it the orphan train movement. The process was simple. Children's Aid Society agents would gather groups of 30 to 40 children, sometimes as many as 100. They'd travel by boat and train for 2 to 5 days. When they arrived at a destination, posters had already advertised their coming. The children would be taken to the town hall, church, or train depot, lined up for inspection. Prospective parents would check their teeth, look at their hands, assess their strength and health. If selected, the child went home with that family immediately. Most families signed agreements to care for the children, but there was minimal enforcement, no real accountability. By 1929, when the program finally ended, it had relocated between 200,000 and 250,000 children, the largest mass migration of children in American history. At its peak in the 1870s and 1880s, the Children's Aid Society alone was sending 3,000 to 4,000 children west every single year. We're told this was a compassionate rescue mission, that these children were saved from lives of poverty and crime, that Charles Loring Brace was a visionary reformer, that this was the foundation of America's foster care system. But the numbers tell a different story. Here's what the historical record actually shows. Less than half of the children sent on orphan trains were actual orphans. An estimated 25% had both parents still living when they were taken. Many had one parent alive. Others had extended family in the city. Yet they were classified as abandoned or homeless and shipped west anyway. One survivor, Hazel Latimer, described her experience. "I'd just finished eating and this matron came by and tapped us along the head. 'You're going to Texas.' I said, 'I can't go. I'm not an orphan. My mother's still living. She's in a hospital right here in New York.' 'You're going to Texas.' No use arguing. She went to Texas. But here's what makes this impossible, to dismiss as simply overzealous charity. The documentation was deliberately poor. Many children were simply taken from the streets, according to historical accounts. No verification of their orphan status, no attempt to locate family members. Records show systematic errors in names, ages, religions, and nationalities. Children whose parents were non-English speakers or illiterate had their information recorded incorrectly or not at all. Many children were found with no birth certificates, no baptismal records, nothing. The New York Historical Society, which now houses many of these records, describes the documentation as incomplete, fragmentary, and difficult to trace. And that's the archived material that survived. But here's where it gets even more suspicious. The Children's Aid Society didn't call them orphan trains while the program was running. They called it the Immigration Department, then the Home Finding Department, then the Department of Foster Care. The term orphan train wasn't widely used until 1978, almost 50 years after the program ended, when a CBS miniseries popularized the name. Why? Because calling them orphan trains was inaccurate, and the organizations knew it. The New York Foundling Hospital, which ran a parallel program starting in 1869, was even more explicit. They called their trains baby trains, or mercy trains. The Foundling Hospital was run by Catholic Sisters of Charity, founded specifically to handle foundlings. Let's talk about that word. A foundling was a child found abandoned, discovered on doorsteps, in alleys, on church steps, in building corners. The New York Foundling Hospital placed a cradle on their brownstone stoop on October 11th, 1869. The very first night, someone left a baby in it. Within weeks, they were caring for 45 infants. By 1871, they had taken in 2,160 foundlings through that cradle. The process was designed for anonymity. The cradle was hidden from view but accessible. Mothers could leave babies without being identified. Here's what the official record says about these foundlings. The term foundling comes from the way these infants were discovered. On the streets, building stoops, and even in the garbage bins of New York City's slums. And we're told this was because of poverty, unwed mothers, shame, desperation, and certainly some of that was real. But here's what doesn't make sense: the sheer scale. The New York Foundling Hospital alone processed tens of thousands of children between 1869 and 1929. The Children's Aid Society relocated 120,000 to 150,000. Smaller organizations added tens of thousands more. Total, 250,000 children over 75 years. That's 300 children per year on average per year on 7.5 decades, during a period when New York's population was far smaller than today. And here's what the records show about where these children came from. Many of the foundlings are discovered in or near tenements where the poor and recent immigrants reside, but some of the babies are left in expensive baskets or at locations suggesting they were born to women who are more economically well off. Wealthy women leaving babies in expensive baskets? That's not poverty. That's something else. And the children themselves. Historical photographs show well-fed children in decent clothing, not the starving street urchins of the official narrative. Many testimonies describe children who were surprised to be taken, who insisted they had family, who never understood why they couldn't go home. The Children's Aid Society's own records acknowledge this. They rated placements successful if the children grew into creditable members of society. A 1910 internal survey concluded 87% had done well. But here's what that survey glossed over. 8% had returned to New York, 5% had died, disappeared, or gotten arrested. That's 13% who didn't succeed. Of 250,000 children, that's 32,500 who either died, vanished, were arrested, or managed to find their way back to the city they'd been taken from. 32,500. And we're supposed to believe this was a compassionate rescue mission? Now let's talk about when this happened. The first orphan train left New York on September 28, 1854. The last documented train arrived on May 31, 1929. 75 years of continuous child migration. But here's what else was happening during that exact time frame. In the 1850s, Tartaria still appeared on maps. Abraham Ortelius's 1570 atlas showed it. Willem Bleau's 1643 map detailed it. The Encyclopaedia Britannica's 1771 edition described it as a vast empire with cities, trade networks, and political organization. But by the 1850s, something was changing. The label Tartaria was disappearing, being replaced with Russian Empire. Territories were being redrawn. Official histories were being revised. And in America, the exact same period saw massive, unexplained changes. The 1850s marked the end of the Mexican-American War, 1848. California became a state in 1850. The Homestead Act passed in 1862, opening western lands to settlement. All of this required labor, massive amounts of labor. And suddenly, 250,000 children become available. Coincidence? Let's look at the destinations. Children weren't just sent to nearby states. They went to 45 states. Every state in the contiguous United States received orphan trained children. Canada, Mexico, even Alaska before it was a state. This wasn't a local charity program. This was a continental redistribution system, and the infrastructure already existed to support it. The railroads, the local organizing committees, the communication networks to advertise arrivals, the legal frameworks to transfer custody. All of this was in place when the first train left in 1854, as if the system had been designed before the program officially began. But here's the most troubling synchronization. 1854, first orphan train departs. Same year, New York's chief of police officially declares child homelessness a crisis requiring intervention. 1869, New York Foundling Hospital opens, specifically to handle foundlings. 1873, New York Foundling Hospital moves to a massive new complex, full city block, purpose-built for processing thousands of children. 1870s, 1880s, peak of orphan train movement, 3,000, 4,000 children per year. 1890s, 1900s, states begin passing laws restricting interstate child placement. 1929, final train. Program ends. Same year the Great Depression begins. Same period when the last references to Tartaria disappear from mainstream encyclopedias. The parallels are impossible to ignore. The official story says these children came from immigrant families, Irish, Italian, Eastern European, impoverished and desperate, and many did. But here's what the documentation doesn't explain: the sheer volume of children appearing with no family connections whatsoever. Historical records describe thousands of babies and young children discovered with no identifying information. No notes, no tokens, nothing. The Foundling Hospital processed 2,560 infants in their first 2 years alone. Where did all these babies come from? The official explanation: unwed mothers, social shame, poverty. But 2,560 babies in 2 years? That's 3.5 babies per day. Every single day, for 2 years straight, women were abandoning babies on a single doorstep in New York, and that's just one hospital. The Children's Aid Society, Children's Village, the New England Home for Little Wanderers, dozens of smaller organizations, all processing thousands of children simultaneously. The math doesn't work, unless these children weren't coming from desperate mothers, unless they were being gathered from somewhere else. What if these children were survivors? What if the mud flood or reset or whatever catastrophic event allegedly struck Tartaria also struck North America? What if cities were destroyed, populations displaced, families separated, and the children who survived were rounded up, classified as orphans or foundlings, and systematically distributed across the continent, given new names, new identities, told to make a complete break with their past? That's not charity, that's erasure. And the methods support this interpretation. Children were inspected like livestock, teeth checked, muscles examined, health assessed. Siblings were routinely separated, brothers and sisters sent to different states, never to see each other again. Children who protested were told they had no choice. Those old enough to remember their origins were encouraged, sometimes forced, to forget. And the families who took them? Western farmers, homesteaders, settlers moving into territories that had been labeled Tartarian on maps just decades earlier. These farmers needed labor. The children provided it. But they also needed something else. They needed the children to have no memory of what came before, no knowledge of the civilization that had built the structures now being repurposed as American settlements. Think about it. 250,000 children distributed across an entire continent, raised by families who had no connection to their origins, in territories that were being actively resettled. Those children grew up, had children of their own, built families who knew nothing of their true ancestry. Today, an estimated 2 to 4 million Americans are descendants of orphan train riders. 2 to 4 million people whose genealogies hit a wall in the 1850s, 1920s, whose family histories begin on a train platform in Michigan or Kansas or Texas. No records before that, no documentation, no way to trace further back. And they've been told that's normal, that poor record keeping and immigrant illiteracy explain the gaps. But what if those gaps aren't accidental? What if erasing the origins was the entire point? There's one incident that reveals the darker truth of this program. 1904, the Arizona Territory. The New York Foundling Hospital sent 40 white children, ages 18 months to 5 years, to be placed with Catholic families. The local Catholic priest had arranged everything, vetted the families, prepared the placements. The children arrived. The nuns escorting them placed the children with the approved families. And then something happened that wasn't supposed to happen. The families the priest had selected were Mexican and Native American Catholics. The Anglo population of the territory was outraged. Within hours, a group of white men, described in legal documents as just short of a lynch mob, forcibly took the children from their new families. Some children were returned to the Foundling Hospital, but 19 remained with Anglo families. The Foundling Hospital sued to get the children back. The case went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled against the Foundling Hospital. The children stayed with the Anglo families who had taken them by force. The legal justification? The writ of habeas corpus shouldn't be used to transfer custody of children. But here's what that incident reveals. These placements weren't about saving children. They were about placing specific children with specific families in specific locations. The Foundling Hospital had selected Catholic families. Mexican and Native American, yes, but vetted, approved Catholic. But that wasn't acceptable to the Anglo population. The children had to be with white families. Why? If this was truly just about giving orphans good homes, why did race matter? Unless the goal wasn't charity, unless the goal was assimilation, integration, erasure of origins. Those 40 children were white, but their backgrounds were unknown. What if they weren't actually from poor immigrant families? What if they were from a different lineage entirely? A lineage that needed to be hidden, integrated, made to disappear into the American population. The Arizona incident was suppressed, barely mentioned in histories of the orphan train movement, but it shows the true priority. Not the children's welfare, not even Christian charity, controlled placement, racial sorting, systematic assimilation. Today, millions of Americans have ancestors who rode the orphan trains. They've been told their great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents were saved from poverty, given opportunities they wouldn't have had in the city, and maybe some of them were. But 250,000 children, 75 years of continuous migration, organized by multiple institutions with infrastructure that appeared fully formed, during the exact same period when Tartaria was being erased from maps and new power structures consolidated across North America, with deliberate poor record-keeping that made origins impossible to trace, with systematic separation of siblings and encouragement to forget the past, with placement priorities that had nothing to do with the children's welfare and everything to do with racial and geographic control. The official story is that Charles Loring Brace was a visionary reformer, that he invented foster care, that he saved children from lives of crime and poverty. But what if Charles Loring Brace was something else entirely? What if he was the architect of the largest mass erasure of children's origins in American history? What if those 250,000 children weren't orphans at all? What if they were the survivors of a civilization we're told never existed? The children of Tartaria, rounded up after the reset, stripped of their identities, and distributed across a continent to ensure their origins would be forgotten within a single generation. Think about it. If you wanted to erase knowledge of an advanced civilization, what better way than to take the children, give them new names, new families, new histories, spread them across thousands of miles so they could never compare notes, tell them to forget where they came from, and within one generation, the knowledge is gone. 250,000 children, 2 to 4 million descendants alive today, all with genealogies that hit a wall in the late 1800s, all told that's normal, all taught that their ancestors were orphans, rescued from poverty. But maybe they weren't orphans, maybe they were something else. The last generation of Tartarian children systematically erased, their origins buried beneath a story of American charity. They called them foundlings, they called them orphans, they called them street Arabs. But what if they were survivors? What if the children on those trains were the evidence we've been looking for all along?